Good Sunday morning to you and welcome to Eye on Politics. We begin with our exclusive one-on-one interview with Governor Greg Abbott. With the school year about to get underway for millions of Texas school children, we asked the governor about the new state program designed to improve safety for students, teachers, and staff. Plus, he predicts his school choice bill will pass next year and that Republicans will add seats in the Texas House.
So this is so important. It may be the best of breed program in the United States of America. The school safety chief went to pretty much every school district in the entire state asking them, what do you need? What can we do better? And through that process was able to couple together several things. One is through this system, which by the way is free to every school in the state of Texas, we will be able to better monitor whether or not schools across the state are following the best practices that have already been put into place by law in the state of Texas. Another thing that this may be the most important aspect of it, it gives us a better tool and opportunity to make behavioral assessments about people who may commit a crime like this, a school shooting. It was clear in the aftermath of Santa Fe and Uvalde that the person who committed the crimes had indicators in advance that something like this could happen. If we are able to gather that intelligence and act upon it, we can save lives in the future. Last thing I'll tell you, and that is we must collaborate and communicate even better. This is a tool where if there's an incident at one school, that school can report it and immediately alert, let's say, surrounding or nearby schools, as well as other schools across the state of Texas, as well as collaborate and communicate with the state of Texas, with law enforcement, so that we can have faster responses.
And it's ready for this year's implementation?
Implementation this year.
And so you mentioned Uvalde before, and I know in view of the two officers who were indicted recently, what did you make of that? And, you know, in the sense of what is your biggest regret on how police responded? I mean, who is responsible ultimately?
Well, listen, the biggest regret is police did not respond quicker and more aggressively to eliminate the shooter. They are trained to do that, and it's essential. And I think they learned that whenever that situation arises again, you go immediately to the sound of the gun and you keep on going until you eliminate the shooter.
How confident are you in the next year's legislative session that you're going to be able to pass taxpayer-funded education savings accounts, school choice, given that Democrats are now targeting certain House Republicans in November?
So if you look at the number of votes that we were able to win both in the primary as well as the runoff, there's far more than enough votes to be able to pass school choice. But let me tell you this, the reality is Republicans are going to pick up several Democrat House seats in this election cycle that will add to the number of people who will be voting in favor of school choice. Point one, I'll tell you in a second, but that's point one. Point two is this. You saw the poll that came out yesterday, which is consistent with what we show, and that is 2/3 of Texans support school choice. Republicans and Democrats, blacks, Hispanics, whites, all support school choice. And so what's going to happen if anybody comes to this Capitol and votes against school choice, they're going to be voting against a majority in their own district.
And where did you think that Republicans were going to pick up Democratic seats?
Well, I'll give you an easy one, and that is Tracy King's district, Democrat on the border. He is the former Uvalde mayor running for his seat. That's a seat where both I and Donald Trump won in the past. It's a Republican seat. We know we're going to pick up that one.
And I wanted to ask you, will you support a bill that will increase public funding? Because $5 billion was left just sitting out there for public schools, independent of ESAs.
Sure. So we put together a plan last session that would have added $5 billion more for public schools, increase teacher pay raise, eliminate the STAR test, as well as to provide school choice. That said, it's important for you and your audience to know that last session, we actually did add $6.6 billion more for public education, increasing to an all-time high, the amount of funding going towards public education. That point aside, our goal is to improve education for every student in the state of Texas. Some of the students go to public schools, some go to private schools, some are homeschooled. Doesn't matter where they are. We want to make sure two things happen. One is that parents have involvement in and the right to choose the school best for their child. Second, we as a state are working on curriculum reforms, teacher pay raises to bring the best teachers in our classrooms to make sure that our kids are learning the best of any child in the United States of America.
But school districts have been passing deficit budgets saying they were counting on that state money. So would you support a clean bill to do that?
So that's to be determined as we get into the session. But the reality of what my expectations are this, and that is school choice is going to pass. The votes are there for it, but more important than the votes, the people of the state of Texas support it. And there's reasons now, proven reasons, why if you're elected a member in the Texas legislature, you better step up and support your constituents as opposed to be working against them.
What is your biggest concern about this presidential race now that Kamala Harris is the presumptive Democratic nominee, and what potential impact will that have on the U.S. Senate race here in Texas? Do you think?
So listen, even though there's a different candidate on the Democrat side, the same perspective still applies, and that is there are two issues that Americans are angry about, and those two issues have not gone away. Number one is the illegal immigration policies under the Biden-Harris presidency and vice presidency. And as we all know, whether she likes the name borders or not, Kamala Harris was put in charge directly by Joe Biden to be in charge of the border and illegal immigration into the United States. And she has failed miserably. And that is also in the aftermath of her saying when she ran for president, she was for decriminalizing illegal immigrants. She wanted to give free health care to illegal immigrants, which would be a magnet to even more illegal immigrants. She wanted to eliminate ICE. And so when it concerns the number one issue in the state of Texas, which is immigration, she is a total disaster, perhaps even worse than Joe Biden was. The other key issue, and that is inflation, the cost of when you buy a gallon of gas, when you buy groceries, when you pay your rent or your mortgage, everything is going up. And the Biden-Harris administration simply does not understand that. In fact, it was Biden and Harris who flooded the United States markets with trillions of dollars more. And that $1 trillion or more, that leads to the inflation, causing every Texan and every American to be paying more out of their pocket.
After the extended power outages in Houston after Hurricane Beryl, what laws, if any, do you think are necessary for the legislature to pass next session to prevent that from happening again, whether it's in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, or anywhere else in Texas?
So for one, we're taking action as we speak. Just had a meeting before this interview, working on that very issue to make sure that we're going to get this fixed even before the session begins, because there are expectations that we are putting on Centerpoint, which was the lead offender and not being able to provide power. We want to make sure that they course correct, not just before the next session, but before the next tropical storm. And so there's a sense of urgency to make sure that the power remains on regardless of what comes our way. That said, there are hearings in both the House and the Senate that will lead to some legislative reforms. Know this, I've already signed well over a dozen laws that have strengthened our power grid to make sure that our power grid is the strongest in the United States, where we will be adding 50% more power to our grid between now and 2030. That said, there are sometimes flaws in some power delivery companies like Centerpoint. We've got to get those flaws fixed to make sure power stays on for all Texans across the state.
After our interview, the governor expanded on his belief that Republicans will flip some Texas House seats now held by Democrats. They include Representative Mihaela Plisa of Plano.
That's a pickup for Republicans.
You think that
Republicans are going to pick up three. They're going to pick up Plisa,
Yeah.
they're going to pick up one in the Corpus area, and pick up McLaughlin, which is the Republican nominee for Tracy King.
In response, Representative Mihaela Plisa sent a statement to CBS News Texas saying in part, quote, House District 70 was the closest race in Texas last election cycle and the most expensive. It's no surprise to me that right-wing extremists are coming to try and take the only Democratic seat in Collin County in 30 years. This should be a wake-up call to all Democrats, reasonable-minded Texans, and public education advocates that we can't let up on our work to win again in November. Coming up, Democratic Congressman Lloyd Doggett became the first member of Congress to call for President Biden to step aside. Next, what the two of them said to each other when they met last week in Austin, and who the congressman thinks could get the nod for vice president. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Now to the race for the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign announced Friday she has received a majority of the delegates needed to secure the Democratic Party's nomination for president. It's all part of a virtual nominating process that began Thursday morning and will wrap up at 5 p.m. Central Time tomorrow. That's when Harris will officially become the party's nominee. She and her new running mate will campaign this week in the battleground states, including Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. The vice president returned to Houston last week to deliver the eulogy at the funeral of longtime Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She died last month after battling pancreatic cancer. President Biden paid his respects to the Congresswoman on Monday night. Earlier on Monday, the president was in Austin, where he announced his new proposals that would impact the presidency and the U.S. Supreme Court justices. The president did so during a speech to mark the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act at the LBJ Presidential Library. President Biden is seeking a constitutional amendment to make clear that former presidents would not be granted immunity from crimes committed while they were in office. The president also called for Supreme Court justices to have 18-year terms instead of lifetime appointments. And he said there should be a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court justices as well. Political analysts say a bill won't pass this year. The LBJ Library in Austin is in the district, represented by Democratic Congressman Lloyd Doggett. He was the first member of Congress to call on President Biden to step aside and not run for re-election after the president sharply criticized performance at the presidential debate June 27th. We spoke with Congressman Doggett about the presidential race, and he told me he met with the president before and after his speech on Monday.
He couldn't have been more courteous and welcoming in his response. Our conversations were brief, but I thanked him for his sacrifice to the country in stepping aside and giving us a chance for success. And he thanked me for my call.
Why do you think Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket instead of President Biden will be better for Democrats?
Well, of course, I'd be for either one of them. But looking at the numbers, over the last year, it was clear that we were falling behind and that we fell further behind after the debate. My call to the president to step aside had nothing to do with his ability or his work as president, but it had everything to do with whether or not we would turn the country over to Donald Trump and see the reversal of all that good work. And so that's why I think we were on a path to defeat, and we're now on a path to victory, but it's an uphill climb. I think Trump has the advantage. We've got to struggle to get this election won.
I was just going to ask you, how would you describe the road ahead? It's not a done deal?
Absolutely not. And Vice President Harris is less known around the country, but the spirit that we see out there, the excitement over having a younger candidate, a new alternative that people had been asking for months, gives me great hope that we can win this.
As you may have heard, not all Democrats in the Texas delegation were too excited about your call for President Biden to step aside. Congresswoman Crockett of Dallas said she described the Democrats' criticism as a circular firing squad. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say she's about the only one who voiced that point of view. I got plenty of encouragement from colleagues who said that they wish they could say the same thing for one reason or another. Didn't feel they could. I wish more of my colleagues had spoken out earlier and we had an additional couple of weeks to work, but we are where we are and it's still possible to achieve victory. And now I think we are all pulling together behind Kamala Harris.
Who do you like for Kamala Harris as VP?
I like anyone who can help her win this election.
Who do you think that would be?
I think that she has a good bench to choose from. And I'll leave that decision to her, but it's probably someone from one of the battleground states.
A governor?
Might be a governor, might be a senator. We've got some good people to choose from.
Texas scored 2 legal victories in its ongoing battles with the Biden administration over securing the southern border. Sarah Jenkins has this week's brief.
The Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals in New Orleans ruled early this week that the flooding barriers in the Rio Grande River could stay for now. They remanded the case back to a district judge. Days later, another ruling in Texas's favor directed construction of the border wall to continue under the Biden administration. A judge ruled that funds designated for border wall construction in Texas could not be redirected. Congress approved more than $1 billion in funding for the border wall over 4 years ago at the behest of then-President Donald Trump. On his inauguration day, Biden paused all border wall construction and ordered a review of the federal contracts granted for the project, describing Trump's campaign pledge as, quote, a waste of money. Texas sued the administration, claiming it broke the law when it halted border wall construction. After the judge's recent ruling, the administration did not appeal, forfeiting any further claims. As for the border buoys, the trial begins August 6th, where the administration will argue that Texas flouted federal law and risked damaging U.S. foreign policy with the floating barrier.
Coming up next, North Texas Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne tells us about her annual jobs fair attracting hundreds of employers who have jobs to fill when Eye on Politics returns. Some 500 companies from across North Texas and elsewhere are taking part in a massive job fair, and they're looking to fill jobs, including those paying six figures. The event is put on each year by North Texas Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne. She tells us about it, and we also spoke with her about the presidential race and whether she thinks her fellow Republicans will expand their slim majority in the House.
Look, she's still going to have to run on her record, not only her record as VP, but also her record before VP. She was deemed as the most liberal member in the Senate, beating out Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. I mean, what really affects me and what I think, our viewers are going to want to listen to is what she's doing in Texas. She has been named the border czar, like it or not. They're trying to rewrite history now, but back in March of 2021, Biden put her in charge of what was happening at our border. And we have seen over, 10 to 14 million people enter our country illegally. 60% of them coming through Texas. We've seen it in our communities. You've seen the increase in fentanyl deaths. Where it was her responsibility to do it, her policies did the exact opposite. They made the problem even worse. But specifically in Texas, not only do you have what's going on at the border, but then you also have her own words that she wants to get rid of the oil and gas industry. In Texas, that's millions of jobs directly and indirectly linked to the oil and gas industry. And as a result of their policies toward American energy producers, we've seen skyrocketing inflation, skyrocketing interest rates, and it's only helped, adversarial nations like China. But, we need to get back to being energy independent, to be able to look at and have our permits for that industry allowed by the federal government, to get the regulatory burdens off of them so that we can go back to having gas that people can afford.
I wanted to ask you, as far as the House is concerned, do you think that it will stay majority Republican? Do you think you will add seats? And do you see Speaker Johnson, if the Republicans do retain the majority, staying in power as well?
Well, I think, look, we don't know what's going to happen between now and November. I think if the election were held tomorrow, I think definitely Republicans would win. I think in November, you're going to see that working families, people who may always have voted Democrat, are going to look at what's happening in their pockets. They're going to look at what's happening in their communities. They're going to look at what's happening in their schools. And they're going to say, we cannot afford another 4 years of Democrat rule. And if that happens, I strongly believe that you're going to see the House maintaining its majority and healthier majority. But I think you're going to see Republicans actually have a majority in the Senate. Now, I think Mike Johnson has had a rough haul. We've got a very narrow majority. I think he has earned the trust, the respect of the entire conference. It's been very difficult in this case, but he gives everybody a fair chance, a fair voice. He gives everybody an opportunity to actually have their say and be at the table. And I think he has handled this pressure better than anybody that I can imagine. So do I think he'll be reelected if we maintain the majority in the House? Absolutely.
So let's talk about the job fair. It's growing, continues to grow.
We're going to have it at Globe Life Field. We're not running out of parking, and anybody who wants to come, parking is free. The event is completely free. We have already blown the roof out of the number of businesses that are participating. We've got over 500 businesses that are participating in every industry that you could imagine: technology, healthcare, manufacturing, professional services, you name it, we've got it. And unlike most job fairs, the thousands and thousands of jobs that they have available that they're going to be hiring for, almost a third actually are six-figure above positions. So this is not just for entry-level positions. These are from positions from entry-level all the way to the executive suite. So it's going to be on August 8th from 11 to 3 p.m.
And remember, we've placed the full interviews on our website, cbsnewstexas.com. Click on the Eye on Politics icon. And that's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening at CBS News Texas. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next week. From all of us here, have a great Sunday.